My name's Chip Syme. I hired in Collinwood on June 14th, 1969. I still had about 2 weeks of school left, but I wanted to get hired out before everybody else got a job. Stayed up there probably till August of '69, and I bid down to Minerva and got the job, and was in Minerva till '75. Got tired of doing 10 mile an hour up and down from the mines, and 30 mile an hour to Cleveland on a mineral train. And then I went to Canton to work. In November '69, I had to work a panhandle job for a month because I was laid off in Minerva. But then in '81, when the bottom dropped out, I was forced to go to Conway. And then I ended up retiring October 30th, 2009. I wanted to work on the railroad the worst way. Ever since I was small, I'd go watch the trains. I had an uncle that was a hump conductor at Minerva and a yard master, and had a couple other relatives worked on the railroad. When I was in 5th grade, neighbor kid moved in. His dad was a conductor out at the yard, and him and I run around together. We rode our bicycles together, and we was all the time, model trains together, and we ended up marrying sisters. So my brother-in-law and I were like as close as brothers. Growing up, I was in New York Central, more of a New York Central fan than a Penn fan. My brother-in-law's dad worked for the New York Central at Minerva. We were 9, 10, 11 years old. We'd go out to Minerva on Sunday. I call him my brother-in-law and I, but we'd go out to Minerva Yard. And sometimes we'd ride. They let us ride the engines, the hump engines. And his dad was a conductor, flagman at the time. We'd go out on Sunday and sweep out the caboose and get coal and fill up the bunker in the caboose. And now on the Pennsy though, I liked both of them. The Dover local would come down from Alliance or Canton, where I was running out of at the time, and they would stop in Minerva, cut off, and get on to the brickyards. And the flagman on there, John Einen, he would invite us up in the caboose. And old guy Benford Eubank took me and my brother-in-law again and Paul Eubank to different towers. We went to Baird a lot, and they knew an operator down there, Phil Mayer. He was going to college at the time. He ended up being the school superintendent of Wellsville schools. And Benford would take us up here maybe once every 3 months. We'd come up here at Leetonia. And I remember the telephone sitting over there, that when there's a fire, that phone would ring, and you knew when that phone rang, everybody shut up. He took the fire call, pushed a button. But I remember seeing Pennsy trains coming down, truck trains coming down through here. I don't ever remember seeing an Erie train, but I had nice memories. When I was in 8th grade at Minerva, I'm watching the New York Central bring a train into Minerva, and my 8th grade teacher, Mrs. Nyhart, said, "Chip, quit staring out the window watching the trains. Turn around and pay attention. Get an education. You'll never have a job where they pay you to stare out a window." So, Mrs. Nyhart was gravely mistaken. I started on the railroad June 14th, 1969. In Collinwood, I was a fireman, and Mr. Wally Kinsey was a huge help to me. His dad knew the road foreman. He got us set up for an interview, and Wally drove me and 3 other ones up from Minerva to get the interview. And then the road foreman called and said, I want you to come up here Friday and bring your clothes. If you pass a physical, you're going to go right to work. At that time, they were killing kids in Vietnam left and right. They didn't have enough firemen, and there was a shortage of firemen. Wally Kinsey and I was the same grade in 4th period study hall. We had a pass to go to the library. Wally had it all planned out, how we was going to do it, and where we were going to do it out, and it just worked out. Wally had 3 2 other guys. He drove us up to Cleveland. There's Terminal Tower, put our application in, and a couple weeks later, the road foreman called. He said, can you come up here next Friday? Yeah, bring your clothes with you. Wally got it fixed up. They said they had to ride 2 road trains, 2 yard jobs, and Wally put these other 2 guys on freight trains, and he told me, he says, you're going to go on the fastest train in the railroad, okay? And about 6 o'clock, I got called for ML12, which was multi-levels automobiles hot train. We get on it there at Delhi Road in Cleveland, Collinwood on the east end of the yard, and at that time the engine crews only went as far as Erie. We zipped that thing right to Erie. I sat in a fireman's seat going around a big curve at Willoughby, Painesville, and the fireman would holler, high green. The engineer hollered high green, and I knew. The speedometer, the GP40s at that time had what they call it, a television speedometer, something really radically new. It had a digital speedometer. And I'd see that thing bouncing, you know, like 59 to 60, 59 to 60, then maybe jump up to 61. And went to Erie, stepped right off on the platform, walked right down, marked the time slip off, got another one, come right back to Cleveland. And then, well, they had me in a yard job, and I marked up. Fireman was a engineer apprentice, let's say. When you went on duty, the engineer would go and check the controls on the lead unit, turn the sanders on. I would go back through the engines and make sure that the air brakes was set right, the controls in the cab. I'd make sure that there was water, oil, make sure we had a jumper cable, and make sure we had a steel cable, a tow cable, in case we got a drawbar, make sure we had at least 2 knuckles, and then I would walk up. When I got to the rear, the engineer would be sitting in a seat, and he'd watch out the window, and I'd wave my hand up like this, and he would give 1 blast, and he would release the brakes on the engines. He'd use the automatic to set them up. Once the brakes were set, then he would bail them off, and when the brakes would release, I would stick my hand straight up in the air, which meant that they were released. He'd give another toot, and then I'd walk up, and by that time the brakeman's there, and he'd tell us what track we were on, and go from there. New York Central and Penn had the same thing. You had 1 year. You had your 1 year test. 1 year test. The first year mechanical, you would be able to run you would be able to hustle an engine after 1 year, and then your second year mechanical, it's just more stuff to learn. Third year was mechanical and air. Then you would be an engineer. But you had to know stuff. Which relay done this? Which relay done that? And if you had a problem, how to fix it. Pretty complicated. They wanted you to follow the brake lines to an engine and be able to color code the color of the pipes, you know, red for diesel fuel, green for water, and stuff you didn't really need to know. But when they would run out of, in the summertime, when there'd be maybe 2 vacations and they'd need engineers, I'd take a job as an engineer. And then maybe a month later, they'd run out of guys again, engineers again. And then maybe a guy'd retire the next year. So I just kept moving up till I was the oldest fireman. And then I'd be the youngest engineer, and the old guys kept dropping off, and, you know. So June 24th, 72, I was promoted engineer. And unbeknownst to me, my brother-in-law, he was a trainman, he was promoted conductor in the afternoon that same day. They had an opening in Minerva, and I came down to Minerva. Minerva, 1969, they had South Pool, 2 crews to the mine. 1 went to Genesee, 1 went to Piney Fork, and every other day they would alternate. Usually called around 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The Piney job always went first, since it was the longest run. And they had a Newton Falls switch run that went from Minerva to Alliance, and then got on the old New York Central up to Newton Falls. It went 5 days a week at 8:30 in the morning. Went up to the bumper house at Newton Falls. Rockwell Standard had it. They made Buick and Cadillac bumpers up there 5 days a week. We had 2 crews in the MD pool, which is Mineral Dispatch. They went to Collinwood. We always had 118 cars, 10,500 ton, and 4 covered wagons. That would fit between She Lines Crossing and Murray Avenue in Minerva. They would have at least 1 yard job, which is a hump job also. Sometimes when the economy was better and there was the need for it, there would be 2 yard jobs at Minerva. Fireman's extra list would usually have 4 guys on it. The engineer's list would usually have 3-4 guys on it. And they had car inspector, first and second trick. They had a car shop, but the car shop was 2 guys that did repair the cars on 9-track. Electrician, machinist, and in the yard office, you know, they had old Fred Barnett was the crew clerk daylight, and the weighmaster, Don Hannon, 2 or 3 bill clerks. They had the old teletype machines for weigh bills. When I worked fired that job from Minerva to Collinwood a lot, and when the old guys see a young guy sitting there, somebody they never saw before, "What's your name?" I told him. "Where are you out of?" I said, "Minerva." "Oh, you're part of the leaky roof outfit." I guess I am. And the Toledo guys would call them the leaky roof outfit because Minerva always got the second-hand stuff. It was always a little bit behind the times. So it was relaxed, you know. Minerva had a hump. All the Piney Fork coal got weighed. The Genesee stuff didn't, because it was owned by North American Coal Company, who is owned by Cleveland Electric and Illuminating. So the Genesee stuff, it never got weighed. The Piney Fork stuff, it was still going to small consignees, like maybe 6 cars here and maybe 50 there. A lot of times at Minerva, you'd have no bills. People today don't know what no bills is. If Piney Fork was loading maybe X amount of ton for a customer, and that was full in the middle of the day, they would just load these cars anyways, and when they come into Minerva, they'd be put on 20 track and be listed as no bills. So whenever somebody else needed coal, they would look, "Oh, we got 20 cars of coal in Minerva." They would use them as part of the next order. 1969, 70, when they humped the cars at Minerva, they had hump riders riding cars down over. The yard master would give them a sheet with 3 cuts on that he would pull the pin on each car individually, but there was 3 cars in the cut. The conductor, the switch tender, would have a switch list, and they would have where the cars were going. You had 6, the railroad called them gunnies, but they were brakemen. And when the cars come up top of the hill, the conductor would look on his sheet, there's 3 of them going to a certain track. The brakeman get on the first one, weigh it, get over the scale, tie up the handbrake, get a second car. Same thing. He'd release the brake and move it down. And then he'd take all 3 cars, which is most you're allowed to do, take them down to the track, and the switch tender was down in the ladder. He also had the same sheet. He knew which track they was going to, maybe to 16, because that's going to East Lake, or maybe to Lorraine. He'd look at his sheet. Oh, there's 1 car going to Newton Falls to B&O. So he'd walk up the ladder and line that. After the cars got over the hill, the guys would be like a bunch of birds or a bunch of sheep, all walk up the hill together, and the process would start over again. Being called at Minerva, 4 o'clock for a Piney Fork job. The Piney Fork job always had 5 covered wagons, and maybe 80 cars going down to the mines. Coming back out of there, the engineer would turn it over to Fireman. Coming up out of Piney Fork, going towards Hopedale, 7,600 ton. The F units just roaring like hell. The thing about down at Piney Fork, they didn't tell you how many cars to bring in. that made no difference at all. You had to bring tonnage in because you had 55-ton hoppers, 70-ton hoppers, and 100-ton hoppers. So the conductor, when he was taking the car numbers of the Piney Fork, he would add up how many 100 tons, how many 70s, and how many 55s. So whenever he got to 7,600 ton, it could be 65 cars, or it could be 75 cars. The engines were rated for 76 cars out of there, 7,600 ton used a lot of times. Okay, we had a train master called Pete Lynch. He's from over east. He wanted to get things changed in Minerva, and it was pretty antique-ish. Pete Lynch bucked heads with guys in Minerva, and when he came back, he left, and then he came back a couple years later, and then he started closing the place down. I'm going to say 74. That's a guess. And he took the tracks out of service, and by that time, Piney Fork had been on a strike 100 and some days, and Hannah Cole finally gave in to them and agreed to their terms, and then closed the mine the next day. But Genesee was still open, which is owned by Cleveland Electric and Illuminatings. So they worked longer, maybe 6 months. But I got tired of the stuff, 10 mile an hour, hearing 3 and 4 or 5 covered wagons just roaring. I wanted some mainline stuff, so I bumped into Canton, got on the fireman's extra list, and worked helpers. And you know, since I was qualified when they was at engineers, they'd reach down and get me, and you know. Since I'm from Minerva, I was a little bit of an outsider to those guys. All the Minerva guys were outsiders to them. We didn't hire out with them, so we were treated okay, but we weren't treated. If we'd have been one of those guys, we'd have been treated much better. I mean, they talked to you, they was good to you, but we weren't a Canton guy. But I liked the helpers in Canton. Excellent job. When the locals would come in, you get 2 GP38s, late afternoon, go west, go to Big Run and shove a train. And a lot of times people don't understand that it wasn't the train needed a helper to get up over Worcester Hill. The idea was to keep the railroad fluent. Like if we got to a line, so if they were going to bring, if TV2 was a half hour away or 20 minutes away, they'd run us because we could maintain track speed and stay out of their way. I liked it better when they went down to a one-man crew on them, just me. I could come into work 15 minutes early. I could read my bulletins, call train dispatcher, he'd tell me what you're going to do. I could go out. I'm not eating anybody else's cigarette smoke. I'm not waiting on they do one more pot of coffee. If I'm called at 6 o'clock at night, I'm going out the door at 6 o'clock. I can go out. If the engine's dirty, I sweep it out. Make sure the cars are signed, get permission from the yard master to get down 49 track, which is the running track, and go west and do the job, you know. At that time, the Conway Fort Wayne jobs were on. Usually 1 or 2 times a day there'd be a recrew. A train from Fort Wayne would have to get recrewed at Canton to make it to Conway if there's track work or other delays. Had a hump job, had a downtown job, had a Maslin job, and they had a yard job that just worked around in the yard and would go over to Republic Steel. A lot of times there'd be 15, 16 engineers on the engineer's extra list, 14, 15 firemen on the fireman's extra list. We had jobs in Republic Steel in Canton to a trick. And in, let's see, October, November, December, we would get Maslin Republic Steel jobs, 3 shifts. The B&O had it for 4 months, and N&W had it for 4 months. Then we had it for 4 months. The shower cab gang in Canton is a humorous story. When they would get scrap into Republic Steel at Canton, a lot of times there's pieces of brass in the bottom of the car that the magnet didn't pick up because it's just picking up the steel. And there's 2 or 3 black guys in Canton, older black guys, I mean 55 years old, maybe 45. they would go through the gondolas when they come out of Republic Steel and get the brass out of the cars, brass and copper. Well, if one of the crew members is walking the cars, it's dark, and there's nobody around, they know somebody's close. But he's inside the car, they don't know who. And then one time somebody saw him. They went up on a bridge and was watching. And they could see these guys going from car to car. And they all had shower caps on, like the black people wear, you know, so they wouldn't get their hair greasy, wouldn't get it dirty. So the Conrail cop finally caught one of them and said, "Hey, we're not going to arrest you. Just don't do it anymore." So the shower cap gang come to an end in Canton. Canton was all right to work, you know. I worked the last train down to Lisbon. I was a fireman. Doug Kibler was the engineer. Was on duty at Salem. The conductor got a phone call, said you're gonna. Now he had paperwork too that they faxed to him. This will be the last run. Maybe we just got out on the main line at Salem, run down to here, Leetonia. They put us in on Erie North, and we run around there's a siding, had the main and the siding. We run around the stuff right there, and then headed down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, kind of down to Lisbon. They only had two businesses. D.W. Dickey, he'd get a spurt of business in the spring with covered hoppers for fertilizer. And in the fall, there'd be a spurt of business with grain coming out of there. The structural steel place, they were phasing the steel out. I mean, Erie got a ton of structural steel I-beams out of there for highways. But in '76, they started using more concrete. And there just wasn't no business. The track was 10 miles an hour, and it was not good. Light rail. That's probably the reason the Erie Lackawanna never bought 100-ton hoppers. Because most of the track wasn't good enough to handle 100-tonners. I mean, it could handle them, but it's only going to handle them so long, and now it's going to start being derailments. The train master had given a note to the conductor. This would be the last train, and we had to pull all the cars out of there. So when we get down there, we went over to the Lisbon paper, said, "You didn't hear this from us, but this is the last run out of here. There'll be no more trains in Lisbon. Thanks for the tip-off." And they got a picture of us coming out, and I took some pictures and myself, you know. April 1st, '76, it was chopped from Leetonia, I believe, up to Canfield, I believe, or maybe even all the way up to Briar Hill. But for sure it was out from here up. It was kind of sad seeing knowing you'd never be down there again, the rails would be ripped up, and now it's a bicycle trail, and I enjoy riding it. You could feel the bankruptcy at Penn Central was still there. Still a shortage of a lot of basic stuff that we needed. Track was terrible until after Conrail got 2-3 months into it. Things really wasn't much of an improvement. You couldn't get brooms to sweep the engine out. Couldn't get paper towels. A lot of the engines didn't even have sand on them. The Valley Division, they had a guy go around to the terminals once in a while and look in the storerooms to make sure you weren't hoarding maybe 10 boxes of paper towels. On my promotion, on my letter that I was going to be promoted to engineer, it was just on regular stationery. It wasn't even railroad, and it didn't say Penn Central on it or nothing. You had to bring your own pencils a lot of times. I mean, they had some, but they usually didn't have enough. But I'd say, yeah, there was nothing that really affected me in any great way. The transition from Penn Central to Conrail, it was strange to see in Erie Lackawanna caboose, someplace that you know it shouldn't be or had never been before. Strange to see Reading GP35s or see LV power on ore trains. Now on the ore trains you always had to have a PC on the front because the LV and the Reading did not have cab signals. But it was strange. It was strange on the radio to hear, Conrail Baird Tower to the ZWW ore train. After you heard Penn Central for a long time. Being over at Orville, seeing a train go up towards Akron with an Erie Lackawanna caboose on it. But it was smooth, it was easy, there wasn't no, you know, it was different seeing a red Central New Jersey engine, you know, and you get to see some RS3s. There was some bad, with me being a Penn Central guy, it wasn't as bad, but if he was an Erie guy, there's like total of 45 jobs in Marion. Wiped out at midnight, or 1 minute after midnight. They had to go somewhere. So I'm gonna probably say there'd be 35 firemen. They had to go somewhere. A lot of them come to Canton. Now, they went behind me they might have been older than me, but they were behind me on a seniority roster. But working in Marion, or working in Canton, living in Marion, the majority of them got divorced because their wife would not have them. You know, they'd get a place in Canton to stay. You couldn't drive back and forth. It wasn't good for them. Maybe 15 years in the railroad, having their terminal closed up, you know. John Barnett was at the house. We were looking at train slides at my house that Sunday afternoon when we got the call that there had been a wreck. When I got to working in Canton, the guys were talking about it, and the mail train hit the dragger, and they stopped. They walked the train, couldn't find anything. The conductor walked up the head end, told the engineer, "I don't see anything, okay to go." So they just started to move, and there was a line hanging down, apparently an airline on one of the TTXs, or trail van cars, the flex van cars. And the fireman happened to look back and see the conductor swinging down on him. So there was no sound on the radio, so they stopped. The crew behind them, Mark Topeka was the engineer and his future son-in-law. Last thing they heard on the radio, the mail train starting to move. Now they were in the siding at Juneau Road, at Perry Drive, and they theorized that it was restricting, but they might have assumed that it was a slow approach, and they went down, hit the rear end. Hit the rear a few times, like in the mill, but the only other time I was involved in anything like that, on Conrail, we come out of Toledo. I had a CG8, or not CG, some big long freight train that came out of Elkhart, called about 11 o'clock at night, and on the bulletin they had a 10-mile-an-hour on the diamonds at Sandusky, where the NW was. They had a wreck the day before, and I come to 10 mile an hour. I had to stop because I had a very long, heavy train. I kicked the air off for the diamonds, creeped across there at 10 mile an hour. The conductor hollered in the radio, "Okay, Chip, you're by the slow order." I started picking them up, and I was at the east end of Sandusky, and there's a car dealership there. I see a headlight, and the engineer tells the conductor, "Did they start coming up yet back there?" He said, "No." We said, "Watch yourself. There's an eastbound coming." He said, "If there's an eastbound coming, you better tell him you're an emergency." Now, I'm only doing about 18 mile an hour because it's just starting to pick up. The engineer hollers, "Hello, eastbound." He said, "We're in emergency here at Pipe Street." He said, you probably ought to watch it. So I went to full service. I just come around the corner, and there was 2 high cubes sitting over on my track. It looked like they just picked them up and just set them over on my edge of the ties. Not in the gauge, but just on the ties. There's a bunch of coiled steel in the back, and when they went emergency, the engines were stopped and the slack came in and popped them off. So I had to wake my brakeman up and got him. I get down between the control stand and the seat, and he got behind the seat. We hit those high cubes, and it sheared every handrail off all 4 engines. They were just fueled in Elkhart, had to rip the hole in all the fuel tanks. Nobody was hurt. The glass, like on the side of the cab, it was ripped out on my engine, on the lead engine. It was a 2778 U23B, Lehigh Valley. Glass, I had glass in my hair and my eyes. not in my eyes, but like around it. And the airlines, you had 4 wipers, and there's a just blowing dirt, and the airlines all hissing. But everybody come out. They pulled the tapes. I never heard a word. I was in Canton until 81, when the bottom dropped out. We went to Florida. I was on the engineers list. There was probably 16 or 17 of us on the engineers list. We went to Florida and come back. We took Amtrak, and on the way in, I was going to mark up. I looked in the yard office on the crew board to get the plugs with your name on it. I'm not in the engineers list. I'm not in the fireman's list. I asked, what's going on? Oh, you don't stand for Canton. So, didn't want to, but I went to Conway. But that ended up being the best thing I ever done. Conway was the best, but when you went to Conway on the engineers extra list, you had to qualify everywhere that job protected. Had to qualify Conway to Altoona, Conemaugh, main line, the main line through Pittsburgh and up to Conpit Junction, and then over to Altoona. I had to qualify to Scully. I had to qualify Port Perry branch, Brilliant branch, Southwest Secondary down to Rad, although I was never down there. I had to qualify to West Brownsville. I was never down. I was down there 2 times, but I was on the slave units of a Detroit Edison train. And then had to qualify to down to Coppell Secondary, to Newcastle. Had to qualify, I was already qualified to Crestline, so I had to go Crestline to Fort Wayne, Bruce Ayers to Toledo up over the Crothers branch. It took me a month. Now they would pay like 6 days to qualify it out. They would pay you 6 days to qualify mainline to Altoona. 2 for the Conemaugh, 1 for Port Perry, but they weren't going to pay it until you got it all done. And then after that, I marked up at Conway. Good, nice place to work. Good guys to work with. Was getting yard jobs at the time. Just outstanding people. Conway was the best place I ever worked. They had a cafeteria there at that time, and usually one old fat black woman. Okay, nice people, and another heavier white woman, and they had a stainless steel counter that you'd slide your trays on. Then they had angled glass up, and then they had a stainless steel counter on top. And if you say, give me the roast beef and gravy, when she turns around to get the scoop, you reach in your pocket and you have change, you throw that change up on top of that stainless steel counter. She hears the 2 quarters, the nickel, and 2 pennies hitting that thing. Instead of 1 scoop mashed potatoes, you got 2. Okay, I really miss the brown tank car gravy. Oh, it was dark brown and like sludge. Oh, salty. Oh, it was just delicious. But everybody down there was nice because everybody come from a different terminal. Guys coming from Mingo, and there's Crestline crews in there, and it was pretty much a lot of guys a couple years older than me, but I wasn't an outsider. I was one of them. To work for Conrail was great. That was great. Whenever the recession hit in 81, a lot of younger guys lost their jobs. Didn't lose them. They were laid off. They went into management. Now, with those people going into management, they knew the railroad. They knew the things that we would face if you'd stall on the hill. They knew there's probably a reason for it, where somebody that was never out there wouldn't understand, well, these engines are rated for so much ton. Don't matter what the engines say, they're just not pulling. But these guys always had good road foremen, because they was younger than me on the roster. I bumped them out of their home terminal when I come down there, But it was Conrail was a treat to work for, a pleasure, The transition from Conrail to Norfolk Southern was very strange. We had been told a bunch of lies that the NS, if you didn't turn your flashlight on when you left the yard office at night, they'd be out there and they'd fire you. And if an engine, the oil wasn't clear at the top, you'd be fired for not checking it and you'd get in trouble. And they really made them out much worse than what they were at that time. Now, eventually they got much worse. But at this time, it was just mass confusion. I hate Norfolk Southern. I hated them. I hated them with a passion. There's no need to treat people like this. If you get kids, you treat them good, and most of the time, they're going to treat you good. But anytime that you have a management that says you have to rate up so many people a month, I wanted away from them. Nobody knew what's going on. Everybody just threw a bunch of trains in there, and it was a real mess. They're sending Bellevue trains all over the place. Through Canton, I had one of the first ones, and I recruited at Freshly Road. The third engine had low lube oil. I'm paranoid, only because of what I was told. I told them, the third engine is low on lube oil. It needs lube oil in it, or it could burn up. Well, that scared them. So we cut the engines off, went into Alliance, come back number 2 track into Canton. They didn't know what to do. There's no place to get lube oil in Canton. And then that train there, another train come up behind it, it outlawed, and then a third will come up behind it, it outlawed west of Maximo. So we had 3 of them stacked up right there. And they were just dumb. They put train in Mahoning siding, they had refrigerator cars in it, and the fuel oil ran out of that after a week and a half, and it was just a mess. A couple months, I mean, they had trains stacked up on the main line here. We'd go for recrew out of Canton, we'd go 1 train length. Outlaw. I mean, they had, they always had 1 track open so they could run them. You always had, there's always 5, 6 trains waiting to get in the yard at Conway. And when you'd go in the yard, they'd say, you're going to go in maybe 204 track following the hump. There was no other tracks. When they would clear one off, you would go right in behind him. I was on the extra list at Conway for probably 6 years. I did jump back to Canton one time for about 6 months, and then NS put on the preferred jobs where the jobs were married up. You had your own same conductor all the time. 20E, 24M, 20K, mail trains. Best jobs was you went to work at Conway at 5 o'clock at night. You take a mail train west, get in there at 11 o'clock at night, go to bed, get up in the morning, I could exercise, and 11 o'clock back on duty, and there was the 3 mail trains all lined up. And when you come back into Conway, usually at 6 o'clock at night, you was off 47 hours and back on duty again. My favorite railroad memory was F units at Minerva, running them. My first job as an engineer was covered wagons to Cleveland. 1772 was the engine number. My favorite Wally Kinsey story is he is very helpful, congenial. When him and I was at Conway and get set up as engineers, we was both sit back at the same time, cut off the engineers list. Wally said, let's get on that Hostland job together. We could ride together. Okay, so both of us bumped on the daylight Hostland job. One of them worked the roundhouse, and Wally worked the pit. Excellent job. And we would ride together. I stayed in that little shanty on the turntable with Joe Munsey, and they'd say, holler him on the radio, we need 6124 taken out and so put in. It was a good job, but all because of Wally's guidance. I trained my son as an engineer trainee and trained my son-in-law as an engineer trainee. My son-in-law, him and my daughter was in the Pentagon together, and Dave wanted on the railroad. In fact, I snuck him on a job when I worked in Conway. It was on the extra list. My daughter said, they come home on leave. My daughter said, I'm going to bring this guy home. You're going to like him, Dad. Yeah, how do you know? Because he takes a week of leave every year to help his dad plant, and a week of leave every year to help his dad harvest. I like that kid. And they come home, could you get him a ride in a train? Depends where I go and who the conductor is, but called for an extra crest line that night, 9 o'clock at night, and we got to Columbiana. I let him run the engine from there to Massillon. He didn't seem excited, didn't say nothing, and a week later, I get a phone call. He wants to get a job in the railroad because he's going to be out in a couple months. But he's a farm boy. He knew how to run heavy hay wagons. He could feel it. He had it, as a railroader would say, he had it in his ass. He could feel when it's picking up speed. Good situation. He was an excellent fireman. I had him in the Altoonas. He hired a crest line. I wanted him to work the Oracle one time in Cleveland. We came out of there with 112 Jennies one night, well, late one afternoon, and we looked back at 26th Street and we had smoke. The conductor forgot to let off a couple of handbrakes. We stopped, and we went to go, and the train wouldn't budge. Dave started to get up out of the seat. No, you sit right down there. He said, I can't get him out of here. I'll tear him in two. No. I'm going to teach you an old Indian trick, Dave. I said, you set the air back into the train, you drop sand, you get some slack, so whenever you start to go, you're going to be on sand. And I said, right when they're releasing, you're starting to pull. He got him out of there. He said, that was easy. Yeah, after somebody told you how to do it. Okay. And the only other fun experience was my son. My son's about 6'3". He was tucked up under the desktop, and the cab signal changed. He can't get his leg up high enough to hit the button, the thing on the floor. So, train goes in emergency. The conductor. Now we didn't have to walk it, but the only other thing, we had a whole string of trains. We had probably 8 or 10 or 12, all light trains coming into Toledo. He could always stop right at the pad. But one night, we had one that had a bunch of sinkers on the back. Coil steel from off WIC 11 to come out of Homestead. Yeah, well, right before he got ready to stop, they kicked him in the ass and put him about 15 feet from the pad. And when the new crew, my son went to get off, he said, the pad's back there. John goes, yeah, I know. He never done that again. Both my parents died when I was 14 years old. My mother died from pleurisy, and my dad died from heart disease about 6 months later. So I had a different outlook on life than maybe most people, but I knew when I turned 60, I wanted to spend more time with my family, more time with my grandkids. I did not like the way Norfolk Southern was treating their employees. So at age 60, the day I can get out, I get out. I could have worked another 5-6 years, made more money, had a bigger pension. That's not my goal. My goal is to be healthy and spend time with them.
Norfolk Southern clear line 24F2692, over. I'd like to say to James Syme, we appreciate your service out here. I mean, you maintained the fine traditions, the 150-year traditions of this railroad that have been lost and forgotten about in recent years. We appreciate it. Have us long and happy retirement, over.
Thank you.
That's right.